So the ideas that I've talked about earlier today about materials and process have really been on my mind for quite a while. But for about 10 years, the artwork and the textiles I was making were really much more concerned with the formal elements of symmetry, balance, and pattern. So for 3 years after my apprenticeship in Japan, my wife and I supported ourselves there by growing and processing the indigo that we used to make a whole range of functional textiles for the Japanese market. Things like obi, noren, partitions, kimono, and using simple geometric shapes for their suggestive power without the distraction of literal imagery like we saw in the historical textile that I showed you. I've worked to create a resonance between the dyed and undyed portions of the cloth. I've also long worked with some properties that are unique to indigo. For example, gradation, which to me reflects the time inherent in the process, as well as just a very clear, it very clearly shows you the way that the dye builds up and becomes darker through successive immersions in the vat. So I started saying a minute ago that the amount of time it spends in the vat, but then multiple dippings as well. The more times you put it back in the vat, the darker it gets. And I've also been working with pouring the dye through folded layers of cloth to create these randomly shaped blotches that in many ways speak to me about the uncontrollable variables in that long process that leads from seed to cloth. I'm still working with noren partitions as both a formal concept, and I'm really excited by the possibilities. But I've also been working to give indigo as a material and process a greater presence in my work. I've always thought of the work that I make as not merely this thing that is the outcome, the end point of this long process, but as objects built of the energy that I expend in making the dye. Each work is really also a vessel that carries in its DNA the accumulated experience of everyone throughout history whose work and insights have formed and built the tradition that I work in. So indigo, as both a material and process, is extremely rich to me. It's rich in cultural meaning, history, societal implications, and it's invaluable for what it tells us about ourselves in how we make things and how we consume things in the 21st century. In a recent exhibit in Dayton, Ohio, I've attempted to more directly engage that role of process, time, and history in my work through the overall layout of the installation, as well as through some individual elements that make up the exhibit. At the entrance, there's a wall of dried indigo that was installed fresh when the plants were still alive, and then slowly dried over the first few days of the exhibit. Next to this, there's a video projection that narrates the farming, the harvesting and drying of the indigo, as well as the process of dyeing the mop cotton yarn that was used in the central part of the installation that you saw earlier. So this is a time-lapse video of the installation and drying of this wall of indigo plants that condenses 4 days into about 2 minutes. And at the same time, this wall of indigo hanging there in the gallery and drying is recreating one of the videos that was projected right next to it, which is a video of a time-lapse video of indigo drying in the field after being harvested. And one of the things that I'm very fascinated with is there is this element of time that goes into this process, and how do people see or experience that? And you're going to see in a minute, once this thing fills up, the video continues for quite a while. And what's happening throughout that time, although it's almost imperceptible, is that the indigo is drying and it's shrinking. What we did was, once the wall was full, we just basically took a picture every 15 minutes, as long as we were in the gallery installing. And then had someone continue that for the remaining 2 days that the video was shot over. So I dyed some 2,000 wool locks. They were just partially submerged in the indigo, and they were hung around the perimeter of the main exhibition space. And to me, collectively, they create a sort of horizon or waterline that reflects the process of immersing the materials into the vat. These are the same things that you saw being dyed in the video. And as individual forms, the wool locks also become the drips of dye that fall off the materials when it's removed from the vat and oxidized. And essentially standing in this space then, the viewer is also submersed in that color and submersed in the vat. So the central work in the exhibit was made up of dyed mop cotton, which is a material that I chose for its utilitarian reference as well as its formal qualities. It's a 16-foot diameter circle that goes up 24 feet through a central atrium. And on the floor in the center of the work is a thick bed of dried indigo plants, which is, again, the material roots of all the dyed works in the exhibit. The shape, their layout in a square shape references both the piles made when composting the indigo leaves, as you saw, as well as the square format of traditional futon covers in Japan. And interestingly enough, the process of composting indigo is referred to in Japanese as ayo nekaseru, or putting the indigo to bed. And that central work leads upstairs into the atrium gallery that has a number of historical Japanese textiles from my wife and my collection. And there are things in there like futon covers, like you can see on the left, on the bottom left here, these three are futon covers. You can see they're sort of square. And there were diapers, baby carriers, kimonos, a whole range of work. But really the upward and downward motion created in the dyed mop cotton in the center of the atrium was intended to create a flow between the past and the present, between the historical works upstairs in the atrium gallery and my own work below. This, to me, creates a play between the past and the present in which both are informing and redefining each other. So in an era, our era of mechanized mass production, I feel like my own choice to plant, transplant, weed, harvest, dry, winnow, and compost indigo by hand is not one of necessity at all. My decision to work this way is really a conscious act of recognition that all the energy extended in the farming and processing of the indigo plants is just as much a part of the final dye stuff and the final work as the indigo molecules themselves. Through the straightforward presentation of cloth and other objects, I hope to direct the viewer to look at a color for all that it is: its materiality, its cultural meanings, its histories, and what it can teach us about ourselves and our own society in 21st century America. Through the formal inclusion of dried indigo plants in my installations, I hope to draw attention to the source of that color and the process that carries it from seed to cloth. And finally, through the overall layout of a space, I hope to create an enveloping experience of indigo's color so that my viewer begins to sense that there's a lot more to the color than just blue. But really, I'm kind of back to this. A very good friend and fantastic artist and indigo dyer named Hiroyuki Shindo once told me to return to the origin. Only then could I create something powerful, something truly original. I think it's really a difficult and powerful charge, and I feel like my work for the past 14 years has been, in many ways, a search for that origin. What is the origin of these things and my interest in them? But for me, I really believe that the origin is here, in the simple squishing of an indigo leaf in the palm of my hand to expose the color trapped in the leaves. I've got one other project that's ongoing at the moment called Indigrowing Blue. This is something that's still sort of in the early stages and evolving, but I'd like to mention it very briefly. I've received a really generous grant from Indiana University where I teach, and I'm working with people from my community to grow and process indigo on campus. And my hope is to begin to slowly establish a center for indigo growing, indigo farming and production at IU. But more immediately is my goal to directly involve people interested in this process, so that instead of just displaying my own understanding of indigo through exhibitions and so on, anyone can really experience for themselves firsthand all the time and energy that's expended in making this dye, and at the same time, the joy of discovering the color that's hidden in those plant leaves. Thank you.